working in our literary department, Symphony, in the intermission, all the mothers in her story. And one of the young men who works in the literary department here said, those fathers, they are such shadowy figures, and we don't know a lot about the father in some of the stories. However, I should have remembered to tell them that in the opening story of this book, the one, the title story, Husband Earth, the father who's visiting his daughter in her new home in America, is a very key character. That's a wonderful portrait of a father. Do you think you do more mother-daughter stuff? Do you tend to do that more? Because that's the only one of your stories that I can think of right now that seriously is about father.
Yeah, well, I think this is the first book where I really consciously thought, as I was working on the stories, that I was writing about families and trying to write about families and wanting to write families. And it sounds strange because I think the namesake is about a family as well, but when I was writing it, I always thought of it as more as a coming-of-age story, and that it was that this go-go story, that the parents and everything, they sort of came around it this way, that it wasn't the main trajectory in my mind when I was conceiving the novel. But in these stories, in this book, there was a point when I was working on the stories, and I really thought, this is what I want to write, but this is what I want to try to better understand. And so I think that, you know, I mean, everything I have written in my life has been inspired by my mother and father. I mean, I mean that in a very basic way, because the life they gave me, the way I was raised, how it all happened, the particularity of my life, of my existence is entirely due to them. And I suppose for everybody that is what we receive. But I think for some reason, it was my need, my desire to try to better understand my parents in some sense that really drove me to write stories from the very beginning, even when I wasn't writing about parent-child relationships. When I was just writing the first stories in the first book, it was still my parents were what I was always, they were what I was meditating about on some level. Their existence, their reality, and then eventually their reality as it trickled down to my reality. And I think in this book, that's what is coming together finally. Those two things are trying to knit them up in a way that I wasn't able to in the first book, or even in the second book. I think this is, I hope, comes across.
From reading all your works, I have a feeling that I know your parents, or didn't have a sense of that. Were they supportive of the idea of our daughter the writer?
I mean, nobody was, not even myself. I was very secretive and uncertain to an extreme degree about my life as an aspiring writer of fiction.
How so? Did you write under the covers?
I pretty much did. I mean, I never talked about it. I never told anybody. I told very few people. I had a different life. I was a graduate student, and I think until I was 30 years old, the vast majority of people in my life had no idea that I wrote fiction. And by that point, I had written my first book. But it wasn't out of the world, so it didn't matter. It was irrelevant.
How did your parents get wind of it?
No, I mean, what happened was, when they knew the first time, the first time it was presented to them, to me, and really was at one point in my long years as a graduate student, I was in a creative writing program for 9 months at Boston University. So that was the first time I said, I'd like to do this thing, try this thing. And, they sort of, I mean, it's a very American thing, creative writing programs. You know, it's in most parts of the world, writers just write, they don't make a school for it. But my parents just thought it was a subset of studying literature, which was what I was ostensibly doing. So they just thought I was doing some sort of specialization in my literary pursuits.
You were studying?
I was studying Renaissance literature eventually, but I was just an English grad student. I hadn't really found my focus. But so that was the first time, and I published a couple of stories in tiny places, and my parents read them, and but I think that much like myself, they thought it was a hobby of mine, and I never, because I never presented it, because I never said, I want to write, and I want to write books, and I want to be a writer, and I never said these things aloud or to even to myself. So then it really wasn't an issue after that until I was 30, and I decided after my long years as a graduate student that I didn't want to be a professor, and so I applied for a residency at a place called the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown.
A wonderful place.
And an incredible place that changed my life forever.
Really?
And if I hadn't gone there...
A particular teacher there?
There are no teachers there. It's just time and space. 7 months of... There are no expectations. They give you a room, a little money to buy your groceries,
and there's the light and the sky.
And the light and the wind and the water, and it's just the most extraordinary place in the world. I really have never gotten over the 7 months. But when I went there, that was the big moment for everybody, for me too, because I realized I was taking a step toward a life, and it was terrifying, but I also felt that I had to take the step. And I told my parents, and there was a rather intense conversation at that point. And they just, because they'd never heard of it, and again, things like writing colonies are somewhat foreign concepts as well, to them, to my parents. But I said, look, I received this fellowship, and they said, what is this? Is this a university? Are there teachers? What are you going to do?
No, it's a shack on the beach.
Exactly. But the funny thing is, they came around, and I went, and they came to visit me, and by the end of it, I had to tell them not to visit me, because they loved it so much. I mean, as I did, but my father came to spend a week with me, and he started going to all the realtors. So it was very, sort of funny that way. But and then after that residency, I published my first book, and so suddenly there was something, to present to the world.
And there certainly